we go.
There we go.
Look.
Got to turn it on.
Peter, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Oh, not too shabby. I know, it's like we were just talking.
You never stop.
I'll start off by just asking about generally your takeaways from Bill Taylor's testimony yesterday.
Well, a few things. First of all, I found it inspiring. In this whole sordid story, ever since the whistleblower came forward, we're seeing examples of wonderful people in government who are committed to competent professionalism. And Bill Taylor really exemplified that. Number two, the story that he told was compelling and terrible, quite frankly. Taylor came out of retirement to take this job. He had a sit down with Secretary Pompeo. And the question he had is, if I'm the ambassador, I want assurance that our policy about fighting corruption in Ukraine and aggression on the border of Ukraine is intact. And if that's not the policy or changes, I won't be able to serve. Pompeo assured him that's the policy. Of course, then Ambassador Taylor went to Kyiv and gradually saw unfolding the reality that there were two different policies towards Ukraine. One was the official one that he thought he was representing, and it turned out an unofficial one that Giuliani was more or less in charge of. And that unofficial one was all about President Trump being able to get the new president of Ukraine to do investigations. What Taylor said, you have the statement he gave, was that everything was conditioned for Ukraine on doing that investigation. The effort to get a meeting in the White House and the effort to get the security assistance released.
Stepping away from just Taylor, but having that in the kind of the totality of the testimony you have heard, what is the overarching picture that is emerging to you of the Trump administration and their interactions with Ukraine?
It's actually pretty simple, and the best evidence of what it was, and most simply and directly stated, was that phone call that President Trump had with President Zelensky on July 25th. And as you remember, in that call, the president asked President Zelensky for a favor. And the favor was to do an investigation on the Bidens in Burisma, and that's where Hunter Biden had been on a board some time ago. So that was the explicit request, a favor for, and the favor was to do that investigation. And of course, in that call, the president said he would have the Attorney General, Bob Barr, talk to Zelensky and also Rudy Giuliani. So these other witnesses, like Ambassador Taylor, are elaborating on what the president himself revealed. And what I think found so compelling about Taylor is that it really refutes any thought that that conversation President Trump had with President Zelensky was just a spontaneous request. It was really part of what clearly was a very concerted plan that was largely being executed off the books by people like Rudy Giuliani, Ambassador Sondland, Volker, and to some extent Secretary Perry.
You've said that, I believe it was several weeks ago, that there's already in your mind enough evidence that proves impeachment. Has that changed or evolved for you since then?
Well, it's reinforcing it. I mean, from the beginning, that phone call of the president, I think, is the smoking gun. If Watergate had the tapes, this issue has the phone call where the president is asking a foreign leader to interfere in U.S. elections. That's a crime. It's against the law for me, any member of Congress, any citizen really, to solicit foreign assistance in our campaigns. So that, I think, is a very serious issue. What's the remedy? Congress would have to debate that. But when it comes to a basic breach of office for private personal gain, that is as egregious as I can think of.
The president and his allies have come out and basically said, yes, copped to this call, but made basically the argument, so what?
And I have news for everybody. Get over it. There's going to be political influence in foreign policy. I'm talking to Mr. Carl. That is going to happen. Elections have consequences, and foreign policy.
How would you respond to that?
Well, in fact, you just named the defense. You know, what Mulvaney did when he came out and made his statement was that he basically said the White House was going from "we didn't do it" to a defense of "so what if we did?" Well, you know, we got to follow the law here. That's the real question. But that is kind of what the defense is. So what? No harm, no foul. Well, there is a harm when you're inviting foreign governments to interfere in our election, and there is a harm when you're doing an end run around the official policy of the United States, which is to provide aid to Ukraine. There is a problem when you're impounding money that has been authorized by Congress for your own personal political advantage. So the "so what" defense doesn't make it with me.
And then going also about, you've in the past said how you hope that the focus of this inquiry will be narrow in nature. Do you believe that maybe that should change, that it should broaden the scope as more evidence comes to light here?
It's really, I think, a decision about when and whether and on what basis we proceed. I mean, there are pretty clear components. There's the question of Ukraine and foreign interference that was invited. There's the question of obstruction of Congress. And the best example of that is the 8-page letter that the White House counsel sent, where they basically said they won't cooperate at all. No witnesses, no documents. That's unprecedented. You know, obviously President Nixon and President Clinton did not like being impeached or the impeachment inquiry proceeding, but they cooperated. They actually produced documents that were requested, and they acknowledged that under our Constitution there's a separation of powers and co-equal branches of government. The president denies that. So that's a second area. Third is the Mueller report, and we'll have to make a decision on that, but there were documented instances of obstruction of justice. So that's an issue. And then others are talking about the emolument clause. And the most egregious example of that was what almost happened, where the president was awarding a multi-million-dollar contract to his own organization in Florida to have the meeting of the G7 world leaders. Now, he backed off of that, but that's an example that was really the most egregious of all these events at the Trump Tower, Trump Hotel, etc. So we'll have to make a decision about that. The biggest objective here is to protect our democracy. And impeachment is an extremely serious remedy that should only be used in the most extreme circumstances. But to the extent it's used, it's not about getting anybody. It's about protecting and preserving our democracy. And it is about reaffirming the principle that no person is above the law. Least of all, the person who has the most responsibility for carrying out the law and abiding by the law.
It seems like there have already been so many moments, even before the impeachment inquiry was formally announced by House Speaker Pelosi, where there seemed to be aha moments. Has something now in your mind changed where momentum is growing behind there being enough evidence for impeachment?
Well, first of all, this is going to be a bitter fight all the way through. Just this morning I was in the Intelligence Committee along with colleagues from Oversight and Foreign Affairs, and the committee room was stormed by about 30 or 40 Republicans who did a sit-in, in effect, and it has destroyed our ability to do our work today. They also completely violated the security protocols. When we go into the intelligence skiff, is what it's called, we have to leave all electronics behind, our cell phones, Fitbits, anything that would compromise security. And many of my Republican colleagues disregarded that. They were trying to take pictures and had all of these devices. So it's kind of a scorched earth response that is disturbing. But I think what has changed here is the Ukraine call, where it's something people can understand, and I think, frankly, are by and large stunned by it. How in the world is our president calling up a foreign leader, asking them to do something that benefits his campaign? And that's what happened there. And people get that and are very uncomfortable with it. And you're seeing in the polling more support for proceeding. It's still very much divided along party lines. Independents appear to be showing more support. But that aspect of it where it's so divisive is of concern to me, but it's also of great concern to me that we protect our democratic traditions, including the principle that nobody is above the law.
And then finally, Peter, and this goes back to what you were just speaking about this morning with your Republican colleagues, and the argument being made that well, why are these hearings being made in private behind closed doors? And you've touched on that in terms of the security aspect and the national security, but just explain, if you could, why it is that some of this testimony is being made behind closed doors.
Well, there's two things. One, we're in the investigatory stage. And under the rules that apply to Republicans and Democrats, we can do investigatory depositions in private. And it actually works if you want to get to as much information as possible. It's also really important that other witnesses who haven't come in aren't reading about it in the paper and able to calibrate their testimony to meet the story that they just saw reported in the paper. And it's very consistent with a grand jury style approach. Second, the Republicans are falsely claiming that they're not participating. There's over 120 members who are authorized to be in the deposition. If you serve on the Intelligence Committee, you serve on the Oversight Committee, or on the Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican or Democrat, you can be in the deposition and be hearing in real time right next to me what that witness is saying. A number of Republicans are there, but a lot of Republicans who could be there aren't showing up. So the idea that they're being cut out, is wrong. They hear in real time from Ambassador Taylor the same as me. They just have to show up. What is in violation of the House rules is for members who are not on any of those jurisdictional committees to show up. So they stormed our committee today. They've occupied it. They've interfered with our ability for the Republicans and Democrats who were in that room to hear the testimony to receive it.
And then just finally, just to follow up there, do you imagine this could be a tactic that they use again?
Oh, I can. It's kind of scorched earth, and you see that coming from the president. He's inciting them, and there's a significant block of Republicans who are basically willing to be the foot soldiers of the president's scorched earth policy. So this is something we're going to have to deal with, unfortunately.
Peter, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.
You have
See
a good
you later.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.